recognize whether it's completely peripheral or something that's centrally located, what a sound means. And I think that's what Dr. Goldfeld from Israel, our inventor of the Reebok system, is trying to get at. Why not rely more on training than on precise, coding? It's very complicated. It's going to take many, many different types of solutions for this. But your patience is, so I'm so thankful for it. And we have another speaker tonight, Dr. Charles Liu, who's going to lead our way at Rancho into neural restoration, truly. I believe we're a team. It's going to take all of our army of rehab therapists, all of our rehab doctors, all of our boots on the ground neurologists, our internists keeping people healthy, our surgeons keeping people healthy. But it's really largely about what can we do to restore neurological function of its brain or spinal cord or nerve when damage has occurred. And so I'm looking to Charles to, recreate rehabilitation, bring us further into the 21st century. So are you all set?
I'm all set. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Raven. I'm gonna put this down. Or not. You know what? Not. Okay, so wow, this audience is incredibly serious. We're gonna kind of lighten up the mood a little bit and talk about something that's much more sorry, lighthearted. No, that's okay. That's how it always goes. We're going to talk about brain surgery. So, I'm a neurosurgeon. My background is actually in engineering. I actually grew up wanting to sort of do things that are similar to what some of my colleagues were interested in doing, which is to create replacement parts of the brain. I grew up in southern Africa and was very much aware of the first heart transplantation that took place. Coming to the United States as a 12-year-old boy, began to watch shows like The $6 Million Man. So I was really intrigued by the concept of technological augmentation of human beings. I ended up doing my PhD with the folks that were working on the artificial heart in Houston, David Helland and Larry McIntyre. It turns out that what I found was the heart isn't that interesting with all due respect to cardiology colleagues. The brain really is what is, I think, the crown jewel of creation or evolution, however you choose to understand it. So I ended up going to medical school and sort of got distracted and spent a few years wandering around learning how to do brain surgery. But I think that I was always very interested in getting back to engineering. So I spent the 5th year of my residency under the tutelage of my principal mentor, which was Michael Apuzzo, who is largely regarded by many as the intellectual catalyst in our field of neurosurgery. And so when he was the honored guest laureate of the annual meeting of the Congress of Neurological Surgeons that year, and as the duty of the resident assigned his service, I was tasked with looking into the crystal ball, if you will, and telling him what was going to happen in the future. And so sort of began to become intrigued with the concept of neurological restoration. Now, neurosurgery is a discipline that is founded on the premise that the nervous system didn't get better when you injured it. So our entire field is founded on and driven by the fear of cutting something and injuring something, right? It didn't get better. So we largely focus our efforts on working on what I call the lumps and bumps in the intracranial compartment and really staying out of the brain matter itself, right? The PIA was really, the gates of Mordor, if you will, not to be entered lightly. And so this is, of course, one of the many editorials that was written on the subject. And so I looked around, and since I was a chemical engineer, I turned to the institution in Pasadena and did what amounted to be an 18-month postdoctoral fellowship with David Terrell and there began to think about issues related to using protein engineering methodologies to create artificial environments to drive stem cell fate. And so spent quite a bit of time, and several of the folks in our residency program actually spent time with me and David, and I must admit that it was really 18 of my best months of my life. It was really wonderful to be there and be liberated from the concerns of the real world, of people dying, brain tumors, cerebral hemorrhage, and so on and so forth, and just, engage our intellect on wonderful problems of advancing humanity. Turns out we weren't really able to bring a lot of expression to those ideas because our understanding of what stem cells were very different. The cellular signaling process involved in lineage determined progenitors is very different from embryonic stem cells, for example. And so we it was really obviously going to take more than 18 months to develop an artificial extracellular matrix protein and then demonstrate its effectiveness in driving stem cell differentiation. And we found that depending on what kind of stem cell, quote-unquote stem cell we use, we have different results. And ultimately it may not matter because as the Nobel laureate this year in medicine showed us that we can get cells to behave the way we want them to behave. We're able to control them. All of the work in stem cells not resulted in a patient walking, right? So when I saw this, I came to Transformational in 2007 with a very specific purpose. The purpose was to try to be involved in doing what Rancho has done throughout its history, which is taking scientific advancements and creating tools to make it useful to disabled patients. And so a couple of years ago, I saw this flyer, and what I did see, in fact, and I think I might have to do what Ted did, just walk over here and run this video. Actually, it's not going to run, but you'll see it tomorrow. This is obviously a patient that is a complete spinal cord injury patient that got up and walked with the assistance of the WeWalk system. So the lesson there for me was that in addition to the strategies related to biological restoration, right, there was an entire world of strategies that are much more technological in nature, right? So began to think about ways of engaging in or working with methodologies for technological restoration. So what is restorative neurosurgery? Restorative neurosurgery is actually a concept that was coined by, once again, Michael Tuttle, my principal mentor. And so let's think about what this means. If the functional capacity of the patient at baseline is represented in this blue line here, and you have a disease process that results in a significant reduction in functional capacity, and this would be something like spinal cord injury or traumatic injury or some sort of other immediate decline in neurological function. And in degenerative disorders, you have a much more protracted decline. But the acute care that patients receive at hospitals such as the Keck Hospital at USC and LA County USC, which is probably the best hospital in the world to keep you from dying in the next 48 hours, there may be some element of recovery. But then what happens after that is what happens here at Rancho Los Amigos, right? It's the concept of what happens to the nervous system after rehabilitation. Now, Dr. Raisin talked about how the concept of rehabilitation has changed. Rancho Los Amigos has been very much a surgical hospital, and many of the surgeries were related to dealing with the orthopedic deformities that were associated with neurological disorder. But since the nervous system never got better, there was no reason to rehabilitate the nervous system. But we know that's different now, right? So we think that there's many ways that our therapists and through repetitive sort of practice, we can get the nervous system to rewire, if you will, and recover to some degree. So what is restorative surgery? I think restorative surgery perhaps can be thought of as a way for us to alter the starting point of the neurorehabilitation process. And so it's really here that I wanted to focus my efforts along this entire continuum of recovery from the acute care here to the ultimate endpoint of where the patient ends up. So, human restorative neurosurgery at USC, it's very important to come up with a strategic vision of what we're trying to accomplish. So it really helps focus your efforts. And so our goal was to create a high-volume clinical program with a comprehensive socioeconomic scope, and therefore global relevance and world-class outcomes. And you can't take care of patients and get outcomes that aren't better than everybody's, then you have no business doing any kind of research. You really should focus all your efforts in doing your job as a clinician. So if you do have world-class outcomes, then you can sort of engage in some of these research activities. But then to use this clinical program as a living laboratory for primary and translational research to restore function to the human nervous system. So first step was to create a clinical program on which much of our research is based. And so I started at USC in 2003, but years before I started, some of my neurology colleagues were some of my closest friends, including Christine Heck, who's sitting here in the audience, has been laying the foundations for the establishment of a comprehensive epilepsy program at USC. Now, there are a lot of challenges related to getting a program like this going, and I'll tell you the principal challenge is that there was really no neurosurgical support, or not the kind of neurosurgical support that was necessary. And to talk about which department is more important in the care of epilepsy patients, whether it's neurology or neurosurgery, is like talking about which one of your two legs is more important than walking. It's really not relevant. You really need both, and you can argue about which one is your dominant leg, but you need both legs. And I think that it's this concept that has really held us in good stead going forward in creating a comprehensive epilepsy program that is, I don't think it's possible to overstate, but it is truly unparalleled in scope and magnitude. This, of course, is the Los Angeles basin, and Ted, you and I live down here, right, down in the house. So this geographic region represents a population that is essentially the size of Scandinavia. I think sort of estimates place the population at 16 to 20 million. And if you would consider that the incidence of epilepsy is increasing in this population, and that epilepsy is the most common neurological disorder in the world, and that 45% of all of the outpatient clinic visits to the neurology clinic at LA County USC, which is the principal safety net hospital in our region, then you begin to ask, who's taking care of all of these patients? And I assure you, it's not any of the other institutions in the city, because the principal risk factors associated with epilepsy is not living in Beverly Hills or Santa Monica, right? It's related to lower socioeconomic condition, poor prenatal care, and some of the other features of the population that principally is treated by the Department of Health Services facility here in the Los Angeles County. So we began to establish a program that can engage in the treatment of all of these patients, whether they're rich or poor, whether they live in Beverly Hills or East LA. And so our program was established at the Keck Hospital of USC, which is the principal teaching hospital of the medical school, a private teaching hospital of the USC Keck School of Medicine. This, of course, is an image of the historic Big County Hospital, or LA County USC. It has since been replaced with a 600-bed brand new facility that is truly quite outstanding in its capability of dealing with some of the most complex traumatic and other disorders that afflict our population. Now, if we had the private hospital and really the largest of the Department of Health Services hospital, why would we need to look elsewhere? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because LA County USC Medical Center has 600 beds. Out of the 600 beds, 400 beds are ICU level, and it's designed to keep you from dying in the next 48 hours. There's virtually no interest to do the type of work that we needed to do in order to take patients to surgery and to work them up for potential epilepsy surgery, which is an inpatient admission that during which time we do our video telemetry. And so in 2007, Helena Chu, Dr. Chu, who's the chair of neurology at USC, and Dr. Reyes came up with the idea of creating a epilepsy monitoring unit here at Rancho Los Amigos for this specific purpose. And so I came out here to help in that regard. Now, I will tell you that I'm not particularly interested in spinal surgery. I think it's incredibly important, but I spent my whole chief residency not putting one screw in anybody's spine. So, but I wanted to be a good citizen, so I came to Rancho and started to do some of the spinal surgeries because my running mate in residency, who was doing the spine surgery here, left and gone to the University of Miami. So, with full disclosure, this is my meager effort in doing spinal surgery, and of course this construct failed, and my partner here at Rancho Los Amigos, Dr. Wolf, had to save me by doing a much more protracted reconstruction. So, you know, Rancho has a very distinguished history of spinal surgery. Many of these spinal surgeons, fellowship-trained spinal surgeons in the Los Angeles region actually trained here at Rancho, and Dr. Wolf is taking a leadership role in that regard. But I really was interested in the head and doing intracranial surgery. There was no intracranial surgery effort. But we had lots of patients who had skull defects because the way we treat intracranial pressure now is to do decompressive hemiectomies. And so I offered, and I assure you my goal in life is not to reconstruct the skull, but I offered to do skull reconstructions for the stated purpose of moving into the intracranial compartment. And you know, we were quite successful in what we did, and we had excellent outcomes. And when Gabby Giffords was shot, he received quite a bit of media interest because of our program, and we were in the newspapers and on television and so on and so forth. But ultimately, what we really wanted to do was to do epilepsy surgery at Rancho, and in 2011, we did our first epilepsy surgeries, and now we have a very, very robust epilepsy surgery program here at Rancho that is part of the comprehensive epilepsy effort that is, as I mentioned earlier, the singular program that I'm aware of that tries to engage the effort across the entire socioeconomic spectrum. So, what is our sort of case model and productivity been? And I think what you see here is this is our total sort of epilepsy-related surgeries. This is our total primary therapeutic and total craniotomy for epilepsy, and then of course the total primary neurostimulation. And I'll talk a little bit more about neurostimulation a little bit later in the talk. But what you see here is a really pretty good escalation. This looks like China's economy, right? I mean, there's been a 100% increase year after year. We expect that we'll do it again next year. And in terms of numbers, I think that if you look at all of the major centers on the west coast of the United States, the major academic centers, we probably do more than all of them combined. This is done at the private hospital, as well as at the DHS facilities. And we really started to build a very robust experience at USC as far as the surgical treatment of epilepsy. Earlier I talked about world-class outcomes. I assure you, not to go into a lot of detail, but our outcomes are truly outstanding and is probably as good, if not better, than all of the published series that we've seen from the other major centers in the world. So the purpose then is not, well, sure, we need to take care of patients, really to move into the research arena, right? So after we established the program, we began to think about ways of adding the research component, and we really went about it in a way that sort of like a fund manager and a stock portfolio. We really wanted to be involved in some level of activity in the entire spectrum of what can be considered to be the divisions of neuroscience, from the subcellular level all the way through the single neural population circuits, functional regions, and ultimately to behavior. And I'll spend the next few minutes and just go over some of the projects that we're involved with. This, of course, we have Michael McLaughlin here, and this is, of course, Mike's APL project, revolutionizing prosthetics, and you'll hear a lot more about this project tomorrow. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is truly a wonderful project, and we are absolutely delighted to be a member of Dr. Richard Anderson's team at Caltech to move this project from the laboratory into human patients. We are also collaborating with Francisco Neurosurgeon, who is a member of the biomedical engineering department here at USC, and Francisco is interested in elucidating the actual mechanism of truly dexterous manual manipulation. And we're doing this with a multi-modal approach, including fMRI and EMGs, and now electrical photography. I think, Richard, you know Zoran, Dr. Anderson. I think he was a postdoc in the laboratory, right? I think he overlapped with Brian Lee. So Zoran is one of our collaborators. He's now a professor down at the University of California, Irvine. And so we're working with Zoran, looking at using just standard electrophotography arrays for the purposes of brain-machine interface. Of course, Dr. Berger has spent the last 45 minutes talking about the MIND project, which is another one of DARPA's high-profile neuroprosthetics programs. And we are absolutely delighted to participate and be a member of his team in that regard. So why should a neurosurgeon care about any of this stuff, right? Aren't we supposed to be this, we're like the Navy SEALs, right? We're not supposed to care about why we need to go get somebody. We just go in and get them, right? Well, I think that there are lots of ways that we need to be concerned about this. There are lots of ways that we should contribute, right? At the very minimal level, the monosynaptic reflex level, we're the only people that touch the human brain without going to jail, right? To be there for the purposes of therapy. And so we have access to human neural tissue. And one of the programs, the large grants that, and one of the real areas of focus and expertise in the Zillion Neurogenetics Institute is a large project that was brought to USC by Jim Knowles, looking at genetic and epigenetic studies at the single neuron level. And of the 4 tissue types that he's interested in, 2 of